Before the Rings of Power, there were the Silmarils. Before Sauron, there was his master Morgoth. Before Aragorn and Arwen, there was Beren and Luthien. Join us as we explore Tolkien and all the ages of Middle-earth with your hosts from theonering.com, Jonathan Watson and Michael Grumbine.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 132, The Hobbit number 20.
Is this our 20th episode of The Hobbit?
20th episode of The Hobbit. Fantastic. We're not even through 8 chapters yet. We're actually just starting the 8th chapter, and we're on episode 20. This could take a while. But I like it. I like the deliberate, slow movement. We find out a lot, and we're going to find out a lot more. I want to ask you first, though, Michael, are you excited that we're going to be able to see a new story, a new way of telling an old story with dwarves and sorcerers and poison, all in theaters in the next week and a half or 2 weeks or whenever it's coming out?
Wait, what? I'm missing something.
Dwarves and girls and poison apples.
Right.
Look, the dwarves. It's
everyone's
made.
favorite.
Oh
yes, this was Tolkien's favorite kind of movie. Was a Walt Disney. I mean, like, the funny thing is he didn't like the original classic that everybody likes now. But one wonders what he would think of Rachel Zegler.
Dude, yeah, he hated Disney back when the rest of us loved Disney. And this here would, if I don't know what word you would use other than hate, but there's got to be something a little more strident that we can use for that.
Yeah, he would just have complete disgust.
Yeah,
I mean, it's in a way, the culture that he lived in was so. Our culture is so morally degraded compared to his, and artistically degraded that I suspect there would be quite a few things. But no doubt he would have very little love for his. My kids call it Sand Brown and the 7 DEI hires.
That's right. I've heard Mud Brown. Sand Brown is a little bit bit kinder.
I mean, sure. Yeah, her skin tone is not the color of mud; it's the color of sand. But anyway,
anyway, here's Tolkien's quote, by the way, from a 1937 letter to Allen and Unwin, C.A. Firth, Allen and Unwin, and he wrote this: "It might be advisable, rather than lose the American interest, to let the Americans do what seems good to them, as long as it was possible. I should like to add, to veto anything from or influenced by the Disney studios, for all whose works I have a heartfelt loathing."
Loathing. There we go. There's the noun you were looking for. He would.
Yeah. When did Snow White? 1936. When did Snow White originally come out?
It's about the same time that Hobbit came out, actually.
37. So this would probably. Oh, this came out December 21st, 1937. So this was even before Snow White. I mean, maybe he changed his tune. Maybe he liked Snow White. Maybe he'd only seen Steamboat Mickey before this. I don't know. But in any case, I'm sure he didn't want that style rendered onto his, the dwarves, the small animals, the pudgy faces, all that sort of weird.
Yeah, I agree with that from the visual perspective. Interestingly, from the characterization perspective, the dwarves of the Hobbit are closer to the 7 dwarves, a little bit closer than his Gimli is.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Gimli and the dwarves by the time of Lord of the Rings were.
Well, the dwarves certainly do mine, don't they? So both dwarves are miners, and they find gems. Perhaps if we threw the Arkenstone into Snow White, that's one of the stories that was never told.
Oh yeah, Tolkien would love that if there was just this huge white gem in the middle of the pile.
This is ripe for a remake. Although
yeah, go ahead.
What's funny is I was just thinking that an unholy union of Snow White and the 7 Dwarves and the Hobbit would probably still be better than the new Snow White that's coming out. From what it looks like.
It's very true, actually. The new Snow White. I mean, I think there's going to be. I actually think the first week may not be too bad in terms of their numbers, because I think a lot of people are going to go to Hate Watch and figure out what's so terrible.
Yeah.
But
we won't make any predictions on box office because that didn't fare very well for us on the
No,
here.
it turns out we're not good at box office, but
that was pretty funny.
we were,
made 20 million. We thought,
who knew that
we're not.
We were kinder.
Yeah, that's true. We were.
Than reality. Reality was harsher than we are.
We thought our fingers were a little bit on the pulse of the movie watching audience, but clearly that pulse is very, very slow, and we didn't catch that at all. All right. In any case, too much talk about movies. This week, guys, we're getting into chapter 8 of The Hobbit, Flies and Spiders. Right? Did I get that right? Yes, Flies and Spiders.
You did.
On screen, not spiders and flies. And we will get into an extended podcast, which you can get to by going to theonering.com/member. We're going to talk more about Beorn. A couple of you, particularly Harrison, brought up some ideas about Beorn, where he was originally from, and how to fit him into the mythology of Middle-earth. Where would he actually be? Like, what? Since he is mortal, Tolkien makes the point, and we'll talk about that. We'll bring up the quote from his letters where he says Tolkien is mortal. Beorn is mortal. Sorry, yes. Tolkien is mortal too, but yes, Beorn is mortal. But Beorn is mortal. Oops. And we'll talk about that and sort of think like, okay, well, if he had to be mortal, what about the shape-shifting bear part of him? So let's get into that in the extended podcast. We will have another chat with all our members. We had a great one last week. That was a lot of fun. Got into a lot of
excellent
certain things. It just wasn't warm enough outside for me to actually grab a cigar like you were, Michael. I'm still in the throes of winter out here.
Yep, it's actually very warm here now. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, but
that's going to be March 31st. I had to do that because I will be out of my home for a few weeks in the middle of March. So March 31st. So if you want to join up and join us in that online chat, go to theonering.com/member or theonering.com/Patreon. And thanks to Lynn and Rich for continually being our wonderful above and beyond sponsors. All right, everybody. We are going to all right, everybody. I do it every time, Michael. I can't help myself.
It's okay. Just go with it. Just embrace the whatever the habit is, embrace
it. We will get into this week's very important
Hobbit Facts.
I don't know why I said important in a very tortured way there, but it was very important that I say that. So what I learned this week, this chapter, or the chapter previous, really, is where Tolkien decided that he's going to change the names of three major characters. And so previously, before in the early edition of The Hobbit, his first draft, Gandalf was actually Thorin. So Gandalf's name was Thorin's character. Similarly, Gandalf, the one we knew, was named Bloodorthin. And Beorn was Medwed. But in these plot notes that he wrote right before this chapter, or I guess right after this chapter, yeah. So I guess it was halfway through the chapter. It was halfway through the previous chapter, chapter 7, where he says he has to change the name of Bloodorthin to Gandalf, Gandalf to Thorin Oakenshield, and Medwed to Beorn, and let the bear be enchanted. Those are his direct notes in there. So this is where, right here, this is when Gandalf became Gandalf, Thorin became Thorin, and Beorn became Beorn. I was always wondering.
And Beorn became a bear.
And Beorn became a bear. That's right. Let the bear be enchanted. His own enchantment. And
Beorn literally means bear. So there's that.
Yeah.
As we talked about last week.
So there you have it.
2 weeks ago.
Hobbit facts. Halfway through, he couldn't stand the names anymore, and he went on with it.
I would agree. And one wonders if he had kept with the original names, would we have loved the name Bloodorthin, for example?
Yeah.
I'm not convinced.
Blad the invade. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think how that doesn't work. What's interesting though is that he wrote Thorin Oakenshield. He didn't write Thorin. He had the whole name Oakenshield. So it makes me wonder if that name sort of just came to him, or I mean, it came from what the Edda, the Dwarven the dwarves in the North sagas. I can't remember the exact.
Talking about the Icelandic sagas or
the Icelandic, yeah. I don't remember exactly now. It all starts blending together. In any case, Thorin was in there, but he decided to change the name. But he added Oakenshield, so that was his own. As far as I know, that was his own addition to the name. It wasn't part of his original name in the Norse sagas. I could be completely wrong because I didn't research this, so take that with a grain of salt, everybody. But this is where they changed the name. Okay.
I was just laughing, imagining if we had Bloodorthen instead, and then Rings of Power had come along and tried to invent how Bloodorthen's name comes about, just like Grand Elf.
No, jeez, why, Michael? Dude, I have been so good in not bringing up the power.
And you have to run across like a dwarf. This is my blade. It's the blade of a dwarf. And he gives it to Gandalf. Gandalf finds the blade of a dwarf or something. It's the blade of a dwarf. A Bloodorthen. Or maybe he'd have to be stabbed by it. The blade is in the dwarf or something. Anyway, this is Rings of Power,
but yeah,
one cannot follow the torture.
It's the AI approach to writing names.
That's right. How would Bloodorthen? That's a question for our members. How would Bloodorthen have come about if you were writing from a Rings of Power perspective?
Oh my gosh!
Anyway, Bloodorthen seems like a.
I forgot about the Grand Elf thing. That's just so bad.
It's so stupid.
Oh, you ruined my night.
So stupid.
It's
lovely. All right, so back to real Tolkien.
So chapter 8, Flies and Spiders. This is when we get some horror and fear in Mirkwood. Michael, would you give us the half chapter summary?
Right. So we're going to we're reading up to, I can't remember if you said this already in this podcast, but we've read up to the point where everything goes dark for the third time, and the third time being their approach to the elves in the forest and the feasting, and Bilbo loses everyone. So that's where we're stopping. So the chapter starts with them entering in single file into Mirkwood, and Tolkien immediately sets about basically turning Mirkwood into a classic medieval enchanted forest full of danger and gloom, and there's basically no hope. Everything about it is oppressive, even for dwarves who are underground. So they travel for many days straight on the path. They've been warned not to leave the path, and their food begins dwindling. And for the first most of their journey, I would imagine time-wise, nothing much happens. They're just traveling and feeling suffocated and eating their food and sleeping, and there's eyes around them at night. It actually reminds me of you can see that cartoons from the 30s, 40s, 50s took almost directly from this passage in Tolkien, where these eyes just sort of appear in the darkness all around them at night, which I had forgotten that was Tolkien's description. So here we have a description back from and maybe this is maybe someone will tell us that there is a previous eyes in the middle of the darkness where you can only see the eyes in fairy stories. I haven't heard of one yet, but so this
I would say this is certainly where it became part of the cultural vision of darkness that we have, right? Because so many people read The Hobbit, so many people saw it or saw the eyes in the dark because of The Hobbit.
I would say so. Yeah. So eventually, when they're almost out of food, they come across a stream, an enchanted stream, and Tolkien is very specific. They have to they have to get across the stream first by getting a boat on the other side of the stream, which is, I guess, about 35 or so feet away.
12 yards.
12 yards, 36 feet. Right. Yeah, and so I mean, I would guess that the last foot or so, probably Bilbo's eye isn't that accurate to tell whether it's 35 or 36. So 30 to 40 feet away. They get the boat back across. They make it across the stream, and then a deer comes bursting in and bowls them all over, knocks Bombur into the stream, and which they were being very careful to avoid touching because Beorn had warned them against it. Was it Beorn or Gandalf? I can't remember. I think it was
Beorn. It was Beorn against the stream, drinking the water. Yeah, that was Beorn.
Touching the water. So Bombur falls into a deep sleep. Bombur was the last one. We have fat jokes from Tolkien, multiple fat jokes in this chapter. Bombur falls asleep and it doesn't awaken for days, so they have to carry Bombur. But anyway, before that happens, there's Thorin actually shoots the deer, but they never recover the meat somehow, I think. Anyway,
I think it leapt back over the river, right? Because it does a great leap, and so there's no way for them to get it, even though he shot it. And,
right. Right.
possible.
Okay, there we go. I missed that part that had left back over the stream. Anyway, so they continue on and are beginning to despair. And at one point, they send Bilbo up in the trees to look over there. And Bilbo fails to notice that he's kind of in a little bit of a valley. So it looks to him like there's trees everywhere, kind of like the picture behind my head, except without the tower ruins of Dol Guldur or whatever that's supposed to be. This is a representation of Mirkwood, though. So anyway, he sees lots of black butterflies, and he gets a breeze on his face, but that's it. So Tolkien actually tells us that they're not that far from the edge, which nevertheless is more than a day's journey because they travel on for another day on the path. And then one presumes when they're fairly close to getting out, actually, most of the way to the other side, but they don't know it. They begin to see first they hear the wild hunt actually pass them by, and that was back at the stream. And then they begin to see lights in the trees, and they explore. And 3 times they try and are stymied to encounter the feasting of the elves, which is a fairy tradition in an enchanted forest, especially. So that's the overview. So on the third time, the second time actually they send Bilbo in by himself, and he falls asleep into an enchanted sleep. So we have not just Bombur, who's now awakened, but has awakened, but not just Bombur falling asleep into enchanted sleep of a type, but Bilbo too, although his seems less strong because he's able to be woken up by the dwarves. And then the third time, everything goes dark, and Bilbo loses his whole company, the whole company of dwarves somehow. And that is the end of where we're stopping the half chapter.
It was a chat. No, that was good. That was really. It's so funny because when I read this chapter, I'm like, how much really happened? And I realize, oh my gosh, so much happened, and so many thoughts like about particularly two things that struck me. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. One, I feel like this is the Hobbit here in Mirkwood is sort of the Barrow Downs of the Lord of the Rings, meaning it's the first horror fear. Like he drives the fear into you as a kid, if you're, depending on how young you're reading this, with those first few pages of Mirkwood, of everything is on the edge of their scene. Like there's a darkened green glimmer, sunlight that stabs into the forest, all these words that make it fearful and horrible and sort of scary on the peripheral. Nothing is directly in front of you. So like the lights, the pale bulbous insect eyes at night.
Horrible, pale bulbous eyes, sort of eyes. So, floating in the darkness when they go to sleep. Yep. I agree with you 100%. This is the first time we see in Middle-earth, or at least the tales told by Tolkien, the horror, his hand at horror. But you and I have talked about how he actually, it's a subgenre that he delves into with some frequency. The Barrow Downs, as you said. Shelob's lair later on in the Return of the King, or Two Towers rather,
the Dead Marshes.
You have the Dead Marshes. You have in the Silmarillion, and you have the book that we're next going to cover after this one, which is complete despair, tragedy, and horror, but on a human level, more like Hamlet than a children's tale. This is fantastical horror. Mirkwood is enchanted horror, so anyway, and so is the Barrow Downs. So you're right. I think you're right. That's the closest that Tolkien gets. Although spiders, Shelob and spiders, Tolkien it turns out he does not like spiders much. From Ungoliant to Shelob to the spiders here, they are a primary adversary and the bringer of horror into his works.
Yeah, he must have had a serious case of arachnophobia. So that was, from Ungoliant to Shelob to this.
Since we're totally qualified to psychoanalyze a dead man, this is what we're going to do.
You would love that. You would love that. So while their eyes are light, everything else in the animals is dark. So when they see things like the moths, right? Of course, there are the Black Emperor moths. There are
butterflies, I think. The
butterflies. Sorry, not moths. Yeah.
The moths did come when they lit fires, and they gave up lighting fires because the black moths would come in and smother things.
Right. So sorry, you're right. The butterflies, the black squirrels.
Yep.
It was dark gray and black moths, and then huge bats, and the phrase I thought odd: black as a top hat. One of those phrases that you won't find in the Lord of the Rings, but still makes its way into the Hobbit as he breaks the third wall, in a sense, as an author.
Yeah, one gets the sense that if that's the kind of description that would have been perfect when you're telling the tale by the fireside to your children. Black is a top hat. Because they're not going to analyze it and say, "Oh, there were no top hats in the Shire," but although Chesterton might disagree with me on that because he thinks children are very astute, but which he's not wrong with some children, and other children are not. So.
Do you think so? So the reason I realized this too, because there was another phrase since we're on the black as a top hat part of the story. He also uses the phrase that they did not care tuppence later in the chapter, which is also something that's completely foreign to Middle Earth, and I feel like these phrases, the way that he uses them here, it makes the story less rich than the Lord of the Rings because he breaks that wall all the time. And I don't think I've necessarily precisely noted that, but I think that's why it takes away from the reality of his world and it makes it into a story. It makes it into something that he's telling rather than he's reporting on as if it were real.
Right. It's less of its own world because it's due to the references to ours. I agree with that. There was some interesting. I thought one of the things we could start doing, or at least if it's appropriate on these episodes, I always catch things that I hadn't caught before. So there was something I caught this time. Turns out Dory is the strongest dwarf. Didn't know it.
Oh, who could pull himself? Yeah.
No, they said they have Philly first hook the boat, but with an iron. But it says Dory is the strongest, and I had totally forgotten that the dwarves rank themselves by strength apparently. So and then this passage about the deer. I would presume. Does he say a stag? I can't tell. I don't remember.
Let's find it real fast.
Flying deer.
Yep.
Yeah, leaping beast, sound of hooves. So we don't know what it is, but Thorin was the only one who had kept his feet and his wits. So this is after they've crossed the stream and their Bombur's the last one's almost the other side. And this deer comes barreling out of the forest right into the middle of them, knocks them over. It says it charged into the dwarves and bowled them over, then gathered itself for a leap. High it sprang and cleared the water with a mighty jump. But did not reach the other side in safety. Thorin was the only one who kept his feet and his wits. As soon as they had landed, he had bent his bow and fitted an arrow in case any hidden guardian of the boat appeared. So the question I have for you is, do you think that Tolkien is presenting this to us as the deer being happenstance, that it just happens right when they get over to bowl it over, or is it actually is there some intelligence, or is it a kind of guardian? Because deers don't usually charge through people and knock them over. That's extremely unusual. I mean, maybe if it's a stag, it might, but and then goes to run away. And it references Thorin saying that it's he's waiting for some guardian, and lo and behold, it turns out the other side of the stream has a guardian that knocks the Bombur into the water and the other dwarves over. So do you think is Tolkien trying to tell us this is on purpose? Is this kind of like some magic of the woods that opposes the dwarves, or is it just happenstance?
And you don't mean the white deer, you mean the white hart.
No, this is the deer that just knocks them
over.
Yeah.
So I think that the elves were chasing the deer and they just happened to be there. Do I think it's part of the force? See, this is now a bigger question that you're bringing up. Where does the elfish enchantment start, and where does the Mirkwood horror end? Where is that line? And so is it the elves protecting their land? Because, they protect the forest path, essentially, they say, although they don't use it a whole lot. They do that. That's their path. That's the only reason it's there. But Mirkwood is a dark and fearful place, and yet they will live in this dark and fearful place. And if the enchantment of the river, so let's talk about the enchantment of the river, because it's also the enchantment. Is the enchantment of the river Mirkwood's enchantment, or is it the elf's enchantment?
I think it's a warping of the elves. I've thought about this for a while. I think what happens is Greenwood, the elves, when they dwelt in it before it became Mirkwood, there's the woods. I think were enchanted because they're enchanted, because elves are creatures of fairy, and Tolkien hadn't. Well, the elves, obviously, just like dwarves, elves change a bit from the Hobbit to the Lord of the Rings.
Right, yeah, right.
But they only change a bit. There's still a lot of similarities between Legolas and I mean, he is, after all, Thranduil's son. So, but there's a lot of similarities between Legolas and the way that elves act. But there's a lot of differences too. So here we have a picture. The first encounter of elves is not one of another race of creatures that's living in a place that you would encounter,
Right.
like the dwarves encounter the trolls, the dwarves encounter the goblins, the dwarves encounter Beorn, and the dwarves encounter the lakemen when they get there. It is like that in one sense, but in another sense, they are part of fairy. This is this enchanted stream and an enchanted forest and the wild hunt, which is the elves just running down animals through the forest, sometimes killing them, sometimes just chasing them, in the medieval fairy texts. And so I think the elves make the forest enchanted, and the darkness that's crept into Mirkwood, which actually is Sauron under the guise of the necromancer, who has over hundreds of years has corrupted this place. That's what has made the enchanted stream. If I had my guess, that's what I think has made things adversarial towards. That's why the trees lean in. That's why there's only black creatures, and the main creatures there are spiders, which we'll find out later. In the second half of the chapter, and the elves can live there because they have a kind of mastery over the place still. So that's not as if the elves are in great danger.
Yeah, they're not threatened.
They're not threatened by the forest.
Right.
So
they're
much.
willing to go out hunting deer in the forest, and the deer apparently are still. They're not the eyes of bulbous eyes of insects, right? They're not a fearful creature of Mirkwood.
And they eat the deer too, because they have roast meats at the feasts that they come across. So they're actually hunting. They're not just chasing them around.
Right. Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. So anyway, that's my sense is that some of the darker and more enchantments of the forest are due to Sauron. But it's quite possible the enchanted stream was always that way, and I could be wrong about that. So I Tolkien, I don't think, ever says.
No, he doesn't. It's funny because when the first time I read through it, the Mirkwood and the elves were very fearful to me. Right, I didn't trust anything in there, even the elves. I thought at first the elves and their feasts perhaps was a trick of the forest being played on
like an
illusion. And so in the same way, Bombur, he didn't falling into the stream, into the enchanted river, didn't give him nightmares. He said, I was having such beautiful dreams. I dreamed I was walking in a forest rather like this one, only lit with the torches and the trees and lamps swinging from the branches, which sounds awfully like what the elves were doing when they were having their feast. Right. And fires burning on the ground. There was a great feast going on forever, going on forever. A woodland king was there with a crown of leaves, right? So he saw the Thranduil, and there was a merry singing,
which the dwarves have not yet seen,
right? And I could, exactly, right. And I could not count or describe the things there were to eat and drink. So it's not. Is it an enchantment of the elves? Like the elves maybe are protecting their land with this enchantment. Is he like? Is he like Cypher from the Matrix, who's like, I just want to stay in the Matrix? And so what they do is they enchant the creatures that come in, and they're like, no, you're just going to stay here. You're going to fall asleep, and then we know that the spiders are going to come and get you, and we will protect our woodland realm.
Yep.
From you. Maybe that's
and the fact that it implants visions of the elves in his head, which he has had no experience of, argues strongly that the enchantment of the stream is tied to the elves.
Yeah, and the stream does it meets up with the forest river and goes by the Elven hall. So,
but I have no doubt that the coming of the spiders, or the growth of the spiders, and some of the darkness and the really foul side of Mirkwood is due to another influence that's not the elves.
Yeah. And then, although I don't think Tolkien would have, when he wrote The Hobbit, I don't think he would have said, "I know exactly what that influence is."
No.
Yeah.
No, it was something he discovered.
Yeah, later, as he wrote The Lord of the Rings. All right, so the enchantment still kind of weird and eerie. Like I think he uses the right word when he describes the elves a little bit later. He says that when they hear them singing, it is an eerie sound. It wasn't beautiful, but it wasn't frightening. It wasn't a horrible sound. It was an eerie sound because it didn't make sense. It's like whistling and humming at the same time when you go, right?
Yeah, exactly. I imagine some sort of Halloween-esque music, but song and
yeah.
and I don't mean the screeching violins from horror movies. I mean a kind of just ethereal, eerie sound, not comforting, not beautiful in the sense that you would want to pay money for a concert for it. But at least not in Mirkwood. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, so then they come up on a white deer right after these other deer, which
right.
And this is something briefly that you brought up before we started recording, Michael, was that there's that also the white hart in white Hart, by the way, not heart Heart, in Narnia as well, and I'd forgotten about that. And what a white deer signifies in Celtic tradition is an encounter with a white deer or white animals in general. They signify an encounter with beings from the other world. So I think they came across this like an aurochs. I remember in Stephen R. Lawhead's Song of Albion trilogy was important, and hear this, and then also in the Chronicles of Narnia. So that tradition Tolkien stuck by when he was
writing. I mean, this is pure. This whole enchanted forest, in a sense, this enchanted forest, the white deer, white. It's actually a hind and fawns. So. And it turns out that it was a hart. The hart had been the guardian of the stream that bowled them over and got shot. And then he was dark. And then the white hind was with fawns, and the dwarves shoot at them and lose all their arrows. But this is pure encounter with fairy. This is the third path. You remember when you and I were reading on fairy stories? This is the third path. It's not the path to heaven or to hell. Yeah. It's the path to the land of fairy. And so they're about to encounter a fairy, and which they do. But yes, the white hind presages it. Although they have long ways to go, so they keep traveling, carrying Bombur after that.
And so timeline wise, I looked this up to see if somebody had worked out what the timeline is, and because it's only a few pages from entering Mirkwood to getting to the Forest River,
right?
The Enchanted River, and that is actually, some people worked out, about 20 days, about 22 days. So there's a long period of time that they're going through Mirkwood, trying to make it to the other side.
22 days until what event?
The Enchanted Stream.
The stream. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So a long time.
3 weeks. Wow.
Yeah. 3 weeks that they've been going on. If you're going by the timeline that Tolkien.
For some reason, I assumed it was like a week. I don't know, but I was clearly wrong.
Which is still a long time to be in a forest like this.
Yeah.
And then they leave the forest path. So that's when he falls asleep. And then they leave the forest path 6 days after that, around August 21st, 22nd, 23rd, somewhere around there. And it's at that point Bombur wakes up, right? He wakes up before they decide to leave, although he has his moment, his tantrum where he's like, I'm not leaving, I'm not going, I just want to go back to sleep. Again, like the Matrix, I know that the steak doesn't exist. I know that when I put it in my mouth, it's telling me that it's juicy and delicious. And you know what? I realize ignorance is bliss. Something like that. That's from the Matrix anyway.
Oh, I was going to point out that it's more opportunities for the dwarves to make fun of his weight.
Carrying him.
It's Thorin that says it this time. We are quite annoyed enough with you as it is. If you hadn't waked up, we should have left you to your idiotic dreams in the forest. You are no joke to carry, even after weeks of continuous, even after weeks of short commons, rather, which is short rations. So making another poke at his weight, which they've done, Tolkien does all the time.
It's kind of a one-trick pony, this guy, Bombur. He doesn't really get much other than his weight in the story. That's all he's remembered for. Poor guy.
It's like Curly from the Three Stooges.
Yeah. What I wonder is like he was out for 4 days. That's no food or water for 4 days. He's got to be like hungry. How does he not, after all this journey, how does Bombur not get a little more svelte? Why is he not dropping a couple pounds?
Well, he might be dropping a couple pounds, but maybe he has hundreds drop. Speaking of which, I was wondering, I didn't look this up beforehand. Thorin makes a comment about how his eyes aren't as good as they were 100 years ago when he's looking across the stream. I'm wondering, is this the first time we've ever had a reference to Thorin's age?
Oh, interesting.
Or is it past? Or did you say anything back in the Unexpected Party? I don't know. Anyway,
I don't know either.
Something for our Discord followers to look up and find.
Post it there, guys.
Is this the first time Tolkien's referencing how old dwarves are or can be? I don't think so. Something is telling me that there's references to long age in the story of Thorin's father. But anyway, we'll have to look it up. We prepared really well. I prepared really well.
No, we do.
Episode.
Hey, it's funny because here's the thing. It's not that we're not prepared. It's that every time you go through it and you think about it more, you come up with new things that you're questioning. And so as much as you prepare, gosh, the history of the Hobbit book, guys, we're 400 something pages in. It's 1,400 pages long. So if we aren't thorough, it means that there's an entire 1,400 page book out there for you that you can go through and get every little detail that you want, which we're using and we're going through. But there's just so much. Every time I think about it, there's another thought that pops in my head, like Bombur not having food or water for 4 days is kind of rough. And how come he didn't lose any weight? Maybe he did, like you said. Maybe he doesn't.
I mean, but there's got to be something to do with the enchantment, because he hasn't had anything to eat or drink, so the enchantment has to kind of put him in a kind of coma or something. Anyway.
So at this point, right, they realize that they need to get a look at their surroundings. So they send Bilbo up, hoping that he's not caught by any spiders up there, because there were cobwebs in the beginning. Not that spiders have been an ongoing threat the whole time, but it's something that Tolkien does bring up. And when he gets to the top, he sees what the beautiful Emperor. The whole thing. And I will say that Peter Jackson's vision of this was pretty cool, although completely wrong, just like most of the book was. I don't know if you remember that look of the top of Mirkwood with the butterflies. I don't remember the color of the butterflies, but it was beautiful. It was well done, and he could actually see where Lake Town was from where he was in the Hobbit, which was kind of weird and wrong. So, and of course, in the movies, there were no elves having feasts either. It was just straight up scary spiders.
Right. Actually, I mean, immediately we went from there to the spiders, because they would have had to, because in the book he comes back down and he thinks that there's no way out, and they're very far from the edge of Mirkwood, which they're not. And whereas I think in the movies doesn't he just fall down, and that's the spiders are after the dwarves already at that point?
I think so.
I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. So here, I'll skip forward a little bit. We're looking at this live, guys, if you're listening to hear. Oh yeah, right there. So he actually catches his feet right on a spider web and falls and gets caught right there. So yeah, right into the spiders.
Yep. And it's yeah, because that's the reaction you'd have if you saw
what is that?
What is this?
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we're not going through. Okay, just to reiterate. I'm allowed to make up words when I want to. Just to reiterate that we are not going to be going through the Hobbit movies 1, 2, or 3 and telling you what's wrong with them, because it would take the rest of our breathing.
Apparently, lives. Have you seen the supercut of only the things that actually happened?
No. Is it like 17 minutes long?
No, it's like 45, and apparently it's pretty good. Not 45. Actually, it's over an hour, because the first half hour of the first Hobbit movie is almost entirely from the book.
Yeah. It's the second and third are.
But it's like a single movie, like an hour and a half or more, a little more.
There is a 3 or 4 hour cut of all the movies that was done. That was much more palatable, from what I understand. Okay, let's move on though, because we can't get stuck on Peter Jackson's horrible Hobbit film.
Did it bother you that he put in the purple emperor from our world. Like it's an English butterfly, so because it doesn't bother me the way the tuppence does, or
No.
the yeah.
I mean, because it's part of the natural world, just like he mentions acorns and beech nuts and things like that, and I don't have a problem with.
So botanical things don't bother us, but human references bother us.
But yeah, the creation, like tuppence, right? That's money that we're
Right.
talking about.
It's money from the 19th century.
Yeah, nobody calls it tuppence anymore, or top hat. No, I guess you could almost believe that hobbits would have top hats and might know what they are. Like maybe
they wouldn't look like 19th century English top hats, but yes,
maybe.
you could imagine a kind of hat that the hobbits would call a top hat.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm just. It's interesting that like when he throws in things that are highly specific, like the purple emperor is a highly specific butterfly. It's not just that he's pointing out butterflies or acorns, but it's a botanically it's very specific.
So they sent they sent Bilbo up. Bilbo comes back down and says essentially, there's forest everywhere, all around. There's no hope, and immediately they blame Bilbo again. Why did we send? Why did we send the Hobbit?
Dwarves are so nasty in the Hobbit. It's your fault. It's like they're all fifth graders or something.
Yeah, right. Like they knew they were in this forest. It's their stupid quest, and whose fault is it that there's forest all around them? The Hobbit.
The Hobbit's fault.
But at least they do send him up. Now they kind of rely on him a little bit to say.
You know what I pictured too, the next line after that I was laughing because Bilbo gets blamed for it. And it said they did not care tuppence about the butterflies and were only made more angry when he told them of the beautiful breeze, which they were too heavy to climb up and feel.
Yeah.
So what you have to picture that he tells them about the forest going on and on forever. They get mad at him. They blame him. He says, no, but there's butterflies. They're still mad. At that moment, I could see him getting very hobbitish. I mean, like, oh, yeah, and there was this beautiful breeze. It was awesome.
He was so
just
good.
because, like, well, if I'm going to get blamed for it, might as well get my trolling in. So.
If you're going to blame me for this here, then I'm going to make you feel
really bad. That's right. Really bad. It's my fault. It's going to be all my fault.
So after that, Bombur wakes up. They eat their last food. Bombur wakes up. He's upset and didn't want to wake up because of the beautiful dreams that he was having. And so essentially, they at this point, this is where they see the red twinkles in the dark after this whole process of Bombur waking up and being upset. And we get the weirdest feasts that the elves have, and it's almost like the elves are taunting the dwarves because they got to know they're there, right? But here's the thing, and we made this point before about the elves being different in the Hobbit than in the Lord of the Rings. They were more closer to the elves of the Father Christmas letters even than you'd say of the Lord of the Rings. This instant feast creation and feast destruction, or the lights instantly all go out, is magical. It is not. It's
and not just the lights; they're the whole accoutrement,
the whole thing. Yeah, and it's like, all gone.
There's sawn. He makes a point of saying there's sawn trunks. There's seats made of sawn wood, and presumably those are gone when like all the various accoutrement of the feast, including the food and everything. Else. Lanterns and goblets and whatever else they had, which this is so fey. This is such an encounter with fairy straight from the books, the Elven feast, complete with an Elven king in the last time they encounter him, which Tolkien makes a point of saying that he has golden hair, which makes it very likely that Legolas's hair is indeed gold as well.
Golden.
Being his son. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's totally straight from the land of fairy, this encounter. And there's no attempt to explain how they do it or anything. This is just all part of enchantment. Also, I would point out, I don't think they're taunting the dwarves. I could be wrong. I'll have to remember when we read through into detail the next half of the chapter. But they're angry, if I remember right, that the dwarves disturbed their feast. So it's their fault, their being the dwarves' fault, that they dared to disturb the elven feast in the middle of the forest, which is very fey. It's very much like, you broke a rule you didn't know about, and now you're going to get punished for it. which is highly
Yeah.
highly applicable to.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I don't
story.
think they're taunting them either. And like you say, as part of the other world, they are more dangerous than the elves of Middle Earth in the sense that they're like the eeriness is appropriate to them, but the danger with them, like even that song, right? They were poking fun at them, and it wasn't fun like we're all having fun together. They were poking fun at the dwarves and the Hobbit when they arrived to Rivendell. It was a little. They were needling them. They knew that they had this power over them, that they were of the other world in the sense, and so that they took that to heart, and they have no problem lording it over them because, as Tolkien would point out, elves are dangerous in this other world, more so than they are in the Lord of the Rings, in that sort of otherworldly sense of they can perform feats that we cannot. Like,
but are they as dangerous as the elves of Lothlorien who show up at Helm's Deep and all get shot?
At least that wasn't a Rings of Power reference. They certainly wouldn't be as dangerous as Arwen with her sword and her bow and arrow at Helm's Deep,
putting a blade to her love's throat, because that's what we all do.
Yeah, well, when you're a ranger caught off your guard, that's what happens.
Right, you deserve it. You deserve it.
You deserve it.
Good thing you didn't turn around suddenly and be like, there goes the king.
Oh, no. That's good for how it should have ended.
That's right.
So it's at this point that it happens 3 times, right? And Bilbo isn't he? Which one is he pushed forward on first?
Second one. So they all try going in the first time, and it all goes.
I love this. They're like, why did we send the Hobbit? You Hobbit, you go now. You go forward first. They're so fickle. They're so bad.
They are
the worst
such
companions.
Mean, low creatures. The dwarves of this.
Right, and so he stumbles forward. He can't slip on his ring. Were you losing me there for a second? Looked like it for a second.
Go for it.
Okay.
He can't slip on his ring.
Can't slip on his ring. And then he fell asleep at that point.
Right.
And nobody can find him. So clearly now we could say that the enchantment of the stream is very much like the enchantment that Bilbo fell under here as he approached the Elven feast. Same sort of thing.
It made me think when I read that. It was interesting. It was like, what do you think would have happened if he had, instead of being pushed, if he had had time to like go around the edge away from the dwarves so they couldn't see him disappear, and then he put on the ring and entered the feast? What would have happened there? Very interesting. I mean, so light, although it says sunlight, is what actually shows up your shadow. So there's no sunlight here. So would the elves have been able to? I mean, they wouldn't have been able to see him. We know that. We know invisibility works against elves, but because he proves it later. But would he have been discovered, or what would he have done? Would he have gone for some food?
Probably.
Yeah.
You'd have this floating drumstick in the air, a little, or a hind leg of a.
But it's not
deer.
because when he holds something, it's invisible with him, like steam.
But it's more fun to imagine that.
Yeah,
the food, the elven food can't be enchanted by the ring.
I mean, but elves would. I think elves would notice if they're like sitting there with their feast, and all of a sudden a piece of food literally disappears from the plate. Poof, gone.
Yeah.
Another piece of food. And I think elves would be better at goblins at catching an invisible hobbit. I think.
Yeah. Okay, so the elven feast is essentially permanently shut down. It doesn't reappear after the third time.
That's the end. That's the end. The third time is when he sees the woodland king. There's no woodland king before that. And the third time there's a woodland king.
Right. And they're all, and it's at this point that Bilbo is now separated from the dwarves. He can't find him anymore. Right.
Correct. And that's where we stopped. I love the description of the Elven King. It's really cool. It says, the feast they now saw was greater and more magnificent than before. This is the third time. At the head of a long line of feasters sat a woodland king with a crown of leaves upon his golden hair, very much as Bombur had described the figure in his dream. The elvish folk were passing bowls from hand to hand and across the fires, and some were harping, and many were singing. Their gleaming hair was twined with flowers. Green and white gems glinted on their collars and their belts, and their faces and their songs were filled with mirth. Loud and clear and fair were those songs, and out stepped Thorin in their midst. So what I see, there's just a tremendous similarity here, a parallel between Finrod Felagund and his encounter with the Min, where he brings his harp in and sings to them when he first meets the Min. And this is a reversal. This is the dwarves coming upon harping elves in the woods. And so interesting. And we get the first hint of their love of gems, with the green and white gems glinting in their collars and belts. Yeah. So they have gems studded on their clothing collars, and they have gems studded on their belts. Kind of beautiful and magical.
Yeah. And kind of they are completely against cultural appropriation. They don't want to share their culture with anybody. So Thorin comes in, and dead silence falls in the middle of a word. They're singing, tra-la-la-la, and then in the middle of the tra-la-la-la,
and everything, and black
goes
smoke,
out.
Fires leaped up in black smoke, ashes and cinders were in the eyes of the dwarves, and the wood was filled again with their clamor and cries. Again, this is magical, right? This isn't like totally. The elves quickly dropped their harps and grabbed their weapons, or threw, cloths over the lights and the torches went out, or kicked anything into the fires. It was just, it's instant. It's poof, everything goes dark. Cinder and smoke is left, and the dwarves calling to each other.
And it reminds me of, I don't know, of orcs running into each other to get Bilbo, but all the dwarves are running into each other. But the dwarves, I guess, at this point, right, they're getting further and further away. So either the Hobbit is carrying himself away on his legs, or the dwarves are being carried away. We will find out what happened.
It is interesting that the cries get further and further. You'd think that a bunch of them in a small, they're all together in a clump. Thorin stepped out; they were right on next to him, and now they're running around, and they're getting farther and farther away. So, couldn't the dwarves have just found each other in the darkness? Why would they? And why would they be running and getting farther away from each other? So, I think there's some enchantment going on with this.
Agreed. Yeah.
With this that the spiders then take advantage of. So.
Yes. Yeah. And it makes me think, I think the elves are in cahoots with the spiders. The spiders are their
no.
They're the moat with the alligators around their kingdom.
Okay. We'll test that theory next time.
Okay. I know. Maybe they just allow the spiders to be there,
They do definitely allow them in a sense. But not. Yeah. Anyway,
they're not in cahoots. They're not working together. Yes, I know. I'm joking about that, but they certainly are fine with the spiders taking care of the things that they don't want to.
Well, one has to think that because the elves have actually no love for the spiders, it turns that the elves must be actually transported, like everything. Like there's a magical transportation of some kind, because the spiders are immediately there, right? They're trapping the dwarves, all within probably 60, 90 seconds of them running around yelling. It can't be much longer than that. And the elves are gone, because the spiders, I doubt, would come in upon elves who are slipping away quietly or something. But anyway, we'll
leave that for next week.
We'll leave that for next week in our speculation there.
Yeah. All right, everybody. This is the end of Halfway Through Flies and Spiders. Thanks for joining us. We will get into who Beorn was and who Beorn, if you were to, just like Tolkien retcon some of the things from Lord of the Rings, like the ring into the Hobbit, we're going to try and do that a little bit with Beorn and what he might have been and what he might have come from, thanks to Harrison and discussion on our Discord chat, which you can get to by becoming a member at theonering.com/member. It's $4 a month. First month is free. And you join us on March 31st for a chat, a real life in-person chat. I send the Zoom link on Discord, and we all go to that because Zoom is actually way better than Discord. But I digress. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Bye, freeloaders.